The International Newsnet World Report is a national television news show available in more than 30 million homes. We broadcast daily real news the networks won't tell you. We are solely viewer-supported. That means you. You can donate at our website, inenworldreport.net. We hope you find the following interview informative and helpful. The International Newsnet World Report is broadcast television in more than 20 million homes in America. We are non-commercial, non-profit, and we are viewer-supported. That is how we can bring you these kinds of stories and interviews 5 days a week. Keep INN broadcasting. Please go to our website, inenworldreport.net, and contribute what you can. You can also email us at inenworldreport@gmail.com. Thank you.
A federal appeals court 5 days ago upheld the dismissal of a civil lawsuit against major U.S. chemical companies brought by Vietnamese plaintiffs over the use of the defoliant Agent Orange during the Vietnam War. The court upheld a March 2005 ruling that the plaintiffs failed to show that the use of Agent Orange violated a ban on the use of poisonous weapons in war, and that the lawsuit did not prove the plaintiffs' health problems were linked to the chemical. More than 30 companies, including Dow Chemical Company and Monsanto, are named in the lawsuit. Today we are joined in the INN studio by Jonathan Moore, who is the lead attorney for the Vietnamese plaintiffs. Welcome to the International Newsnet.
Welcome. Thank you.
First, for our viewers, just a little bit of background on the case and how did it get to this point?
The case was filed in 2004 by Vietnamese individuals and an organization called the Vietnam Association for Victims of Agent Orange. It was filed in 2004, even though we're talking about events that happened in the 1960s and early 70s, because there had been an embargo on any economic transactions with Vietnam until well into the middle of the 1990s. So it was, although it was filed in 2004, it was a timely suit. And what we're seeking is a very simple thing. Everybody acknowledges that the use of Agent Orange, and it wasn't just the use of Agent Orange, it was a poison contained in Agent Orange called dioxin, which everybody recognizes as one of the most lethal chemicals ever produced. That in Agent Orange was this poison that was sprayed over Vietnam for 10 years by the United States government. Over 5.5 million acres. It's estimated that up to 80 million liters of this chemical was sprayed over Vietnam, and has caused untold health problems, not just for the Vietnamese who were sprayed, but also for the U.S. veterans who actually did the spraying.
And let me interrupt you right there. Are the U.S. veterans also, do they also have a case that's similar to this one that's going forward?
Yeah, they had veterans. A little background. There had been a case filed in the late 1979, I believe, by U.S. vets claiming that they were made ill by their exposure to the dioxin in Agent Orange. That case settled in 1984 in front of the same judge who dismissed our case. It settled in 1984 for $180 million. The chemical companies who were sued at that time agreed to pay into a fund $180 million to compensate what eventually was almost 300,000 U.S. veterans who claimed injury as a result of their exposure to dioxin.
Well, that kind of money for all those vets doesn't really spread out very well. And how is it possible that if the companies were guilty for the U.S. soldiers and they were standing side by side with Vietnamese natives, how could the Vietnamese natives not be affected by the chemical in the same way? This isn't making any sense.
Well, in '84 it was a settlement, so there was never a determination of liability. It was on the eve of trial that the case settled. So the chemical companies could argue that there was no finding of liability. In fact, they have consistently maintained throughout the last 25, 30 years that there is no danger from exposure to dioxin, even though $180 million was paid. And even more significantly, the United States government has, since the early 90s, been paying $1.5 billion a year to U.S. vets for Agent Orange-related illnesses. So there's now been probably close to a total of $20 billion that has been spent over the years to compensate U.S. veterans who've been made sick and ill and had birth defects and had cancers from their exposure to dioxin, yet to this day, there's not been a single Vietnamese who's been compensated either by the United States government or the U.S. chemical companies for their exposure to this deadly and toxic chemical.
So I'm understanding there is full acknowledgement of the damage from dioxin to U.S. soldiers, even though it wasn't settled legally, that there has been monies paid along those lines.
In the court of common sense, there's clearly a recognition that Agent Orange, the dioxin in Agent Orange, caused harm. In fact, just last year, I think in December or October of last year, the American Public Health Association passed a resolution acknowledging the link between exposure to dioxin and disease and calling for the compensation, the full compensation not only of the Vietnamese, but also of the remaining vets who still have cases whose injuries didn't appear, whose illnesses didn't materialize until after the settlement. Those are the remaining U.S. vets who are still suing to this day.
During the course of the case and the appeal, did you feel that evidence was suppressed, and what kind of tactics were used by the lawyers representing the chemical companies when you were trying to make your case?
Well, we've never been able to get to the point where we can really start collecting new evidence about related, one, to the question of whether exposure causes disease, or the level of the knowledge that the chemical companies had about how dangerous dioxin was.
No, I mean, the agent dioxin does cause disease. Aren't there studies going on this? Haven't there been research done on this? Isn't this a known commodity? So how is it that you could not get to the point to present that evidence to a court?
Well, we were precluded from doing that because the court, you have to understand the framework that we brought our case. We're Vietnamese nationals suing in a U.S. court. We sued on two theories. One was an international law theory, that at the time of the Vietnam War, customary international law prohibited a country or a military from using poison as a weapon of war. Clearly, dioxin is a poison. Nobody disputes that. And so we sued on that theory in the U.S. courts. We also sued on just a typical tort theory of products liability in the same way that the U.S. veterans sued. But we were precluded from going forward on both those claims. On the international law claim, the court concluded, both the district court and now the Second Circuit Court of Appeals have concluded that even though there was a ban on the use of poison that existed back at the time of the Vietnam War, that was a well-established customary international law principle, we did not make a case for that kind of conduct in our pleadings. And on the second grounds, on the state tort law theories, they said that the chemical companies are immune from suit on a doctrine called the government contract of liability, which basically says if a company that contracts with the government complies with the government specifications and warns them of the dangers of the product, they're immune from liability. And you can't sue the U.S. government because they're immune anyway. So we basically have been told, however you want to slice it, that we have no